Admiral Trell of the Galactic Conclave stared through the viewport at the small blue planet that had caused so much concern among his people. Earth, as its inhabitants called it, had been observed for over 3 centuries now. At first, the Conclave had merely catalogued it as another world with primitive life forms, barely worth a footnote in their vast archives of cosmic exploration. But then the humans had surprised them. In just 200 years, they had progressed from basic combustion engines to rudimentary space travel. The speed of their technological advancement was unprecedented in all recorded history of the 27 spacefaring species in the Conclave. "Admiral, the human representatives have arrived," announced Lieutenant Farn, his scales shimmering under the artificial light of the diplomatic vessel. Trell straightened his posture, adjusting his ceremonial sash. "Send them in." The doors slid open, and 3 humans entered. Their soft, hairless faces betrayed no emotion that Trell could interpret, which made him uneasy. Leading them was Ambassador Thomas, a tall male with graying hair. "Welcome aboard the Harmony," Trell said, using the translation device pinned to his throat membrane. "I trust your journey was comfortable." "Quite comfortable, thank you," Thomas replied with what humans called a smile, "though I admit it's still disorienting to travel 50 light years in under a day." Trell gestured toward the conference table where holographic displays showed various data points about Earth's history. "Please be seated. As requested, we prepared our findings for discussion." The humans sat opposite Trell and his 2 advisors. The Admiral activated the central display, which showed a timeline of human warfare. "This is why we hesitate to admit Earth to the Conclave," Trell began. "Your species' propensity for violence exceeds any we've encountered. These red markers indicate major conflicts throughout your history." The display was littered with countless red dots, clustering more densely in recent centuries as human population had grown. Over the past 100 years alone, you've had 2 global conflicts that killed millions, followed by a prolonged period you called the Cold War, where your major powers stockpiled enough nuclear weapons to destroy your entire biosphere several times over. Thomas nodded solemnly. "We don't deny our violent history, Admiral." "Yet you petitioned for membership claiming to be peaceful," said Advisor Kell, tapping her claws against the table surface. "Our protocols are clear. No species may join that poses a threat to galactic stability." The second human, Dr. Rivera, a researcher in comparative xenology, leaned forward. "If I may, there's something your analysis overlooks." Trell tilted his head, the equivalent of raising an eyebrow. "Please elaborate." "Your timeline only shows when we fought. It doesn't show all the times we chose not to fight." Rivera gestured at the display. "Computer, overlay Earth's nuclear weapon capabilities with actual deployment." The display shifted, showing a blue line representing nuclear capability rising exponentially from the mid-20th century onward, while a flat red line hugged the bottom axis. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, despite possessing tens of thousands of nuclear weapons and numerous provocations, we never used them again. The third human, General Lee, spoke for the first time. "What Dr. Rivera is highlighting is restraint, something your analysis doesn't account for." Trell's membrane fluttered in confusion. "Restraint? You see our capacity for violence and assume we'll inevitably use it," Lee continued. "What you don't see is our growing capacity for peace." Computer, display global violence statistics over the past 5 centuries. A new graph appeared, showing a clear downward trend in violent deaths per capita despite rising population. "We're the first species in our own history to become less violent as we became more technologically advanced," Thomas added. "Most species in your records followed the opposite pattern." Advisor Kell looked skeptical. "Yet you still maintain military forces." "As deterrence," Lee replied. "The last major power conflict was over 70 years ago. That's unprecedented in our history." Trell considered this information. "You're suggesting that your understanding of violence gives you a unique capacity for peace." "Precisely," Thomas said. "We know the cost of war better than many species that have never experienced it. It's like an inoculation. We've developed antibodies." Rivera pulled up historical documents. "Look at these peace treaties, international laws, humanitarian organizations. After each major conflict, we created new systems to prevent the next one." Trell studied the data before him, seeing it with new eyes. The pattern was undeniable. Rather than each new weapon leading to more destruction, humans had become increasingly careful with their power. We don't claim to be perfect, Thomas continued, but we understand something fundamental that some conclave species don't, that power requires responsibility, and that violence should be the very last resort. Trell sat back, his perspective shifting. You're suggesting that your warlike history makes you less dangerous than species that have never known conflict. Lee nodded. Those who have never felt fire don't respect its burn. Consider this, Rivera added, displaying a final chart. Earth's international aid contributions compared to military spending. The ratio has reversed in the last century. Trell rose from his seat and walked to the viewport, looking down at Earth. The small blue world seemed different now. Not a powder keg waiting to explode, perhaps a valuable addition to the galactic community precisely because its inhabitants understood their own capacity for destruction and had chosen a different path. I will bring your perspective to the Conclave Council, Trell finally said. Perhaps we have been measuring the wrong variables all along. Thomas stood, extending his hand in the human custom. That's all we asked. The chance to be judged, not just by our worst moments, but by how we've learned from them. As Trell clasped the human's soft, warm hand, he understood that peace wasn't merely the absence of conflict, but the hard-won wisdom that came from overcoming it. Perhaps humans had something to teach the galaxy after all.